Welcome. For the next few minutes, think of me as your history professor for a very brief survey course. Our topic? 100 years of absolutely profound transformation for the Christian church, stretching all the way from the trenches of World War I right into our digital age. And let me tell you, it's one of the most turbulent and fascinating periods in all of religious history. Okay, so let's jump right in with the central paradox of the last century. On the one hand, in traditional strongholds like Europe and America, the church's cultural influence started to fade. But at the very same time, it was experiencing this explosive, phenomenal growth across the global south. This isn't just a minor shift, folks. It's arguably the single most important story in modern Christianity. And we're going to unpack the forces behind it. So here's how we're going to tackle this incredible story. We'll look at the crucible of global war, then the revolution in technology. After that, we'll see how the demographic center of gravity shifted. And finally, we'll examine the challenge of secularism before we wrap up with some key takeaways. First up, trial by fire. We're going to explore how the absolute horror of modern warfare forced the church to completely reevaluate its role in a world of unprecedented violence. Now, this timeline you're looking at, it's not just a list of dates. Each one of these events was like a seismic shock to the system of faith. From the industrial-scale slaughter of the First World War to the nuclear terror of the Cold War, every conflict forced believers to ask some really tough questions about God, about nation, and about violence. At the beginning, the Protestant response to World War I was this incredible, fervent, almost crusading zeal. Many American churches, as this quote shows, actually framed the conflict as a righteous, holy war. It was a necessary fight in their eyes to defend Christian civilization from what they saw as barbarism. But then World War II happened, and that idealism, it was just completely shattered by the sheer scale of the destruction. You had the mechanized genocide of the Holocaust, the terrifying power of the atom bomb. It forced a massive moral reckoning. The very idea of a holy war became unthinkable, and even the traditional Christian idea of a just war was suddenly on shaky ground. And this disillusionment leads us straight into the Cold War, which was framed as something much bigger than just a political fight. It was seen as a global spiritual battle. You had the so-called Christian West, led by the US, versus the godless communism of the Soviet Union. Faith itself became a major weapon in the ideological arsenal. All right, let's pivot a bit. Because while all this global conflict was raging, a whole different kind of revolution was kicking off. One powered by technology that would lead to an era of outreach like nothing the world had ever seen before. You really have three major technological waves here, and each one was a total game changer. Radio was the first. Suddenly a preacher's voice could bypass the church walls and go straight into millions of homes. Then came television, which brought the whole spectacle, the whole experience of a crusade right into your living room. And finally, of course, the internet created this global, decentralized network for communication on a scale that was just, well, it was literally unimaginable 100 years ago. And you can see the results of that revolution right here. Suddenly, mass crusades like Billy Graham's weren't just for the people in the stadium. They were broadcast to the entire world. Global parachurch groups could now operate with the efficiency of a multinational corporation. And you got these powerful new tools, like the Jesus film, which could be mass-produced, translated, and sent absolutely everywhere, spreading the message far beyond any traditional missionary routes. Now, here's what's so crucial. This technological revolution didn't happen in a bubble. It happened at the exact same time as that dramatic demographic shift we talked about at the beginning, a global realignment that would move Christianity's center of gravity away from the West for the first time in centuries. I mean, just look at this chart. It tells such a dramatic story. As post-war Europe slipped into what a lot of historians call a spiritual apathy, making the church feel more and more like a museum, the complete opposite was happening elsewhere. Faith was exploding across Africa and South America. The global Christian map was being totally redrawn. So, with all this incredible growth happening in the global south, the old way of doing things just wasn't going to cut it anymore. That old colonial model of just, sending a missionary from the West, it just wasn't effective or sustainable. The new model, as you can see, became all about training and equipping local and national leaders to build and lead their own churches from the ground up. But, and this is a big but, even as the church was expanding globally, it started facing this powerful new ideological challenge, especially back in the developed world. This challenge really crystallizes around an idea called secular humanism. So, what is that? Well, in a nutshell, it's a worldview that puts human reason, ethics, and justice first, instead of divine revelation. The idea is that humanity can and should solve its own problems without needing to rely on some higher power. And this way of thinking became more and more dominant in Western culture all through the 20th century. And this wasn't just some abstract philosophical idea. It came with all these other changes in society, a huge focus on materialism, the breakdown of traditional family structures, and this rise of a celebrity culture that created new gods in sports and entertainment. All these things were competing for people's hearts and minds, and it often pushed the church right to the margins. Okay, so after that whirlwind tour through 100 years of history, what's the bottom line? What are the really important takeaways from this turbulent century for the church? Well, when you step back, you can really see these four huge forces pushing and pulling on the church. War shattered old ideas of a Christian West. Technology created unbelievable new opportunities for outreach. Globalization completely shifted the demographic map. And all the while, secularism was challenging the church's very relevance and moral authority, especially in the West. And this leads to one of the most interesting and kind of ironic lessons from this whole period. It's a paradox of freedom. The argument goes that when you have a society with complete religious toleration, the church's unique message can get watered down. And instead of a vibrant debate of ideas, you get a kind of spiritual apathy, which makes it a lot easier for secular alternatives to take root. And all of this leaves us with one final and, I think, pretty provocative question that really defines the church's challenge today. We live in a hyper-connected world. The technology exists to reach almost every single person on the planet. But has that massive expansion in reach outpaced the ability to offer a message that modern, globalized society actually finds relevant? That right there is the core question for the century ahead.